this is part 2, which is how you care for a small sword. So for a small sword, you need two things: a file and oil. This is machine oil. This is from Walmart. It is for sewing machines, actually. Um, but for maintaining swords, you can use any just pure mineral oil. You can get laxative oil from the pharmacy, and that works too. Basically, it just has to be pure oil, preferably with no additives. Don't use olive oil, don't use coconut oil, don't use canola oil. Those have things in it that are food, and that will prevent your sword from staying clean. What happens is, well, when you use your sword a whole bunch, two things can happen. One, you can get giant fucking nicks in your sword called burrs, that when your sword makes contact with something, the metal will displace from the force and create a notch. And that notch is literally the metal buckling and pushing out the sides so that it creates a W or an M shape. And that turns into a saw. And once you have enough of those, your sword is a saw and it's dangerous again, which means you need to file them out. The other portion, which is the actual vile negligence that I've committed on this thing, is um, if you don't properly oil your sword often enough, it will rust because your finger has water on it. It has oils and things on it that are not pure mineral oil. And as a result, if water makes contact with your sword, or, any piece of metal, if you're, I'm sure most of you know this, if metal makes contact with water, it will rust. And I have let this poor thing rust. So I'm going to file off the rust. What I've already done, actually, is coated the shit out of this thing in mineral oil. But I'll do it again for reference. The first thing you want to do is that if it's got debris on it, like this thing did, which it had dirt on it, don't ask why, you got to wash it off. So I actually took water and paper, toilet paper, and just made sure there was no literal hunks of shit on it. The second thing I did was I coated it in mineral oil. This is all the easy shit. You just get your paper and you just make sure that whatever is soaked in mineral oil is rubbing it all up and down. And once you do this, you're basically free to touch it because it is your fingers as well are now covered in oil. It's keeping the water out. Once you've done all that, you're free to start filing. Filing has a whole fucking thing to it. This file is one way. If you push with this file, it will drag off metal. If you pull with this file, it will fuck up the file permanently. So you do not do a sawing motion with your file. What you do is you push only, and then you release and come back. If you don't like getting metal shavings on your hands, you can cover your hands in gloves or paper. But the procedure I use, which I find the most effective to get it even filing on a sword, is to just pinch it between your fingers and push. And you will hear a file go, and it will just scrape the shit out of your sword. It's just removing the mass of the sword. And the result of this will you just be peeling off the skin of the metal that has rust on it. It's a pretty simple process. And once you do that, you will have removed most of your rust. You can then go up and down with it, and you can actually see all the metal that's come off this thing just from the filing. It is really just like obliterating the outside of the blade. Um, just from a little bit of it. And yeah, it's as simple as that. Sword maintenance is pretty dang easy. With this small sword especially, it's easy to get stuff off the inside, but because this sword, I don't know if you could see it, it has a fuller, which means, this is hard to describe. The cross section of this sword is triangular with a divot in it, so it's actually closer to an A shape. The result of this is that the sword um, is a lot more flexible and it's pretty stable in its thrust. It's really good at bending without breaking. You can really give her, and you can even bend it and pull it back. But it's still quite stable for thrusting. So it bends and it flexes, and it does that quite easily. But when it comes to actually pushing on stuff, it's quite stable. It delivers a good thrust. This is how small swords were designed. They were designed with as little mass as possible to be as nimble as possible, with still enough thinness and power to be able to pierce into bodies. These things were a fucking nightmare to when you were fighting people, because it would be really, really fast and quick exchanges that were incredibly violent and very subtle. The exchanges that occurred were effectively very, very fast, épée fencing. This is épée, this is foil, this is dudes standing in a line and poking each other very quickly, and whoever pokes first wins. And if you don't get poked, you won. This is not a sword that cuts. This sword cuts very poorly and is tantamount to whipping somebody. All of that is to say that these things were terrifying back in the day of like dueling, because small swords, which small sword is kind of, it's the name of it, but it's our name for it. A small sword is a vague thing, just like a rapier is a vague thing, because a rapier could be a foil or an épée or a saber, and they're all different weapons with different purposes and goals. All that is to say that most of the names we actually have for swords right now are very, they're only contextually useful for us, and they're not very historically relevant. But I digress. These swords were about very, very, very fast exchanges in which you pierced somebody's lungs and then left. You would go bat, you would poke them, and then just be done and be like, "You're fucked, man. I fucked and hit your lung. You can't breathe." And when you were getting hit by these things, uh, it would be like you're just doing your thing, and if your adrenaline's pumping, you don't notice until like 5 or 10 seconds later, and you go, "Uh oh, something's not right. My diaphragm isn't functioning properly. That's a problem." And so that is the story of the small sword. There is an extra bit of info to share about filing swords. And that info is you can file your sword sharp. It's very easy to do this. And so there's a slightly different procedure for rounding edges. And it's very simple. You just go at it. I usually twist the blade. That helps me. You can also drag across the blade if you're feeling spicy. You just have to make sure you're hitting it at different angles, so you're kind of going in a circle. You can see I'm going this way, then I'm turning it, then I'm going this way, and then I'm turning it, and I'm going this way. And that will create a rounded, almost like a hexagonal edge profile. And that's a lot safer to fence with. As a result, you can see, maybe you can see, this edge is quite fat. And this edge is much fatter because I've gone and rounded it off manually. This is important because even though this thing is terrible at slashing, you still don't want to slash people with it. Nobody wants to fence with a dangerous sword. That's not what we're here to do. And frankly, if I wanted a dangerous weapon, I would pick up a hunk of rebar. A hunk of rebar is a terrifying weapon. Because you don't need to be good at using a hunk of rebar. You can just hit somebody with a hunk of rebar. That's that. I think I'm done here. Like, a bat and a knife are incredibly dangerous weapons for a very good reason. And it's because a bat and a knife need no training, and the effective danger is just a straight line in terms of skill. A longsword is kind of like that, but honestly, like a longsword can be like properly defended. It's a little unwieldy. There's all sorts of things that can go wrong. But a dagger's a dagger. You stab him. A bat's a bat. You whack him. A small sword, if this thing was sharp on the tip, it's quite round. I don't know if you could tell. Yeah, you can probably see it's got like a pin on the top. This thing was sharp, it'd be pretty fucking scary. And I could definitely just take like wire cutters or bolt cutters and just snip the end, and then I would have like a genuinely terrifying weapon. Um, that would be so easy to do, dear God. Uh, but like, if you fuck up with this thing and the guy has a knife, like, and you don't know what you're doing, you're gonna get bodied. A knife is a terrifying weapon. A knife has been a terrifying weapon for forever. Even in army days, even in armored combats. This is actually wild. I'm going to close on this fun little fact. In a lot of manuals, I'll post the quote here actually. There's a fantastic quote from Fiore. But in a lot of manuals for fighting and armored combat, one of the most dangerous things mentioned in armored combat is the Rondel dagger, which is effectively an ice pick. It is a dagger that is about as big as this file, but it is a round profile and is pointy on the tip. And the whole point of that fucking thing is you grab a dude and you stab them through their chainmail because it will pierce the chainmail and kill them. It is a main gauche in other terms. But like in every version of armored combat, the Rondel dagger is like, hey, you gotta watch out for this fucking thing. Because if some dude gets the dagger on you, if they get the dagger drop, you're fucked. It is the way to get bodied in armor. And grappling is a really common situation in armor because longswords aren't very effective. Hammers are pretty much not effective at all. Even spiked maces are pretty much not effective at all because they don't have the piercing potential of the dagger, and it's a lot harder to get that force in. Picks weren't great because they were just unwieldy. They required a lot more like finesse to hit into gaps. And so the two genuinely effective things that you had to work with were one, half sorting, and pole arms. I'm going to keep them the same thing because it's the same idea. Pole arms specifically were very good because if you have a big hammer on a long stick, you can ring their fucking bell and it will suck. That would genuinely hurt and I don't think it could generate enough force to like dent armor and cave it in, especially the helmets. But you would just ring their fucking bell and they might fall over. And the other is the dagger, because the dagger just gets in there, and you can apply enough force to smash through chainmail, and thrust through gaps, and get into helmets, and around necks, and into the groin, and all those terrible places. Swords, in the garbage. Maces, in the garbage. Hammers, in the garbage. Shields were basically useless. Arrows pretty much did nothing. Crossbows were pretty effective depending on the period, but even then, you were mostly just relying on the bolt somehow getting a lucky hit in on the chainmail, which was a pretty hard shot to make, or somehow donging them in the head hard enough with like a 200 to 300 pound bow that they just went and fell over. And then I don't know, you got to crush them with a rock. That's about it. Armor was really crazy back then. Anyway, thank you for hanging out for story time with swords. I'm out. Cheers.